Welcome to DrJLT Economics. I'm Dr. Julian Teng. In today's episode, I want to talk about corporate tax. This episode is inspired by a video that I watched this morning on RT, in which I think a Marxist economist, Richard Wolff, whom I do like, made some comments on the situation on corporate tax in the United States, and I think there is one serious omission and one mistake I believe that he has made, which just made me wonder just how broadly are the facts known. And so I want to basically present the facts, and then I want to make comments on the situation of corporate taxation, and I want to make a suggestion as to what would be a reasonable way to evaluate corporate taxes. And finally, I want to give words of caution to governments, particularly in this, I'm thinking about the Chinese government, which has been learning a lot of free market from the United States, that perhaps some of the bad lessons could be learned if one is not very careful. So this is basically the layout of today's episode. And in the end, I will also make a very brief summary in Chinese, just in case that there are some listeners who are Chinese speakers who would perhaps appreciate a bit of just at least a general overview of what this episode is about. So first things first, what were the omission and the mistake that Professor Richard Wolff made on RT today? Well, I think the omission was, of course, he talked about corporate tax, but he ignored, or he left out a big story, which is that there are numerous, the world's largest number of loopholes in the U.S. tax code that basically made it such that a lot of large corporations who have basically paid off the politicians who have written or who have rigged the tax code, they don't have to pay any tax. They pay zero tax. Sometimes they even get tax credits. They get money back from the government. And so that is something that needs to be discussed when we talk about corporate tax rates, because it is those big companies are the ones that we think should really pay taxes, and of course they are not pay taxes. But when we talk about corporate tax rates, a lot of these tax rates are applied at the same time to small businesses, and small businesses don't have the privilege of benefiting or leveraging those loopholes, because those loopholes are not designed for them. So that is a very important omission, I think. And then I think he made a mistake in saying that during the past year, or actually during the last decade and more, and the U.S. government, instead of taxing corporations and using the tax to fund its initiatives, elected to borrow from corporations, to borrow money, and specifically borrow from the rich and the corporations in order to fund its initiatives. And this allows those corporations and the rich in general to make a lot of money, and in the process widen or broaden the wealth gap. This, of course, is factually incorrect. What has actually happened was that the Federal Reserve has been printing money in what is called quantitative easing. And in printing this money, what they then have done is, of course, they purchased bonds from not only, in the beginning it was just what is it called? The U.S. government's bonds. What is it called? But anyway, that's by the government basically issued bonds, right? And then the government then spent money on their initiatives. But in recent years, especially since last year, en masse, what the Federal Reserve has been doing is also that it prints money and directly purchases corporate bonds, including junk bonds by companies that are practically 100% zombie companies who have absolutely zero prospect of paying back the money that they borrow. And of course, when they borrow this money, what they can do is not in production because the company is run so inefficiently. The only thing they can do is to make purchases in their own stocks so that the price of their stocks will go up, and this will reward their shareholders as well as their top executives, who are also shareholders and who have also those bonus programs that are evaluated based on share prices. So that is what's happening, and that is how the wealth gap has been widening. It's not because those rich people lent money to the United States government. On the contrary, they borrowed money either from the government or from the Federal Reserve, and or from banks indeed, because exclusive to them, they have access to zero interest rates. They have access to negative interest rates, all at a time when normal people see relatively normal interest rates when they borrow. And people who use credit cards will see that some of the highest level of credit cards interest rate in history, up to 20%. That's what's happening. That's what's causing one of the mechanisms that caused the widening of the wealth gap. Of course, I have made episodes on this issue about the widening of the wealth gap by means of money printing. Specifically, I'm thinking about the two feedback loops that I mentioned, that I talked about in an episode, and I will put that episode, link to that episode in the description below. So that is that. Right. So this is basically what inspired me to make this episode. And of course, I'm making this episode not just to point out that there are these issues, but I think a lot of people, especially those on the left, pay a lot of attention to individual issues, and rightfully so. But they are less enthusiastic in paying attention to corporate issues, to business issues, which I think are equally important because it is, when people talk about the rich, it's not necessarily the rich individuals, but more importantly, the rich corporations. And so that is something that we need to talk about, right? And so exactly, are the corporate tax rates in the United States high or are they low? Well, I think, in my personal opinion, I think they are perhaps high for small businesses, but low or non-existing for large corporations, particularly because of the loopholes. And I have also heard some libertarian economists, Austrian economists, who say that loopholes are good. There should be historically in the United States there were even more loopholes, and that's why interest rates could be high, and so on and so forth. And of course, I strongly disagree with that argument. I think it is highly inefficient to have loopholes in the tax code. Tax code should be an effective, an efficient tax code should be one that is clear, should be one that is simple, and the most importantly, I think an efficient tax code should be one that is either flat, meaning that every corporation, big and small, pay exactly the same rate, or it should be progressive, meaning that small businesses, by the nature of their early stage of development and less ability to weather the uncertainties of markets could be shielded from some of the tax burdens. But big corporations, corporations who are strong enough to withstand a lot of market uncertainties, should be taxed at a higher rate, and that is progressive tax for corporate taxation, right? So that these are the points that can be argued for. But a regressive corporate tax system, a tax system that is filled with loopholes designed for large corporations, is one that is inefficient, right? It's inefficient because loopholes, there are so many of them, and a small business, for example, simply cannot handle those, so they have to pay large sums of money to hire accountants to hire accounting firms who then prepare the taxes. And of course, for large corporations, in order to benefit from all these loopholes, they need to hire accountants, and in order to ensure that loopholes that specifically designed for them are still there, what they have to do then is that they have to continue to bribe. Basically, it's basically legalized bribery, otherwise as lobbying, right? Otherwise as known as democracy, otherwise known as the United States of America, right? So that's they need to pay the bribes or campaign contributions, otherwise known as campaign contributions. So basically, it's a bribery. They need to bribe those politicians, and sometimes this can get dearly. So that is the situation that I see. And one point that I really want to emphasize, and this is perhaps the end of today's episode, which is that a lot of governments from developing countries are looking up to the United States as a model. And I know for a fact, whether they want to admit it or not, that the Chinese government has learned a lot from the United States, whether in privatizing healthcare, whether in privatizing the housing market. These initiatives, I can see that they basically copied what the United States have been doing. But whether it's Chinese or other governments, they need to be careful when copying or when learning, let's say, when learning from a foreign country, a foreign nation, in knowing why, not just how it is there, what is there, but why it is there, right? Those loopholes, those regressive tax codes that exist in the United States as a result of bribery, as a result of a corrupt system. I just must point out, for example, one thing that I want to point out, right, is that if you look at the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, it clearly says this: no state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. Right? This is the U.S. Constitution. And the U.S. dollar itself is completely unconstitutional. The Federal Reserve, its existence is unconstitutional. But of course, they do it. And for them to break their own constitutions and then to create all these regressive taxes just to make sure that the big corporations win and the small businesses and working people lose, that is purely because of bribery, of corruption. And for a foreign government to learn from this without knowing that this is because of corruption will not benefit from the United States. In fact, what had made the United States a great nation, arguably the best, the biggest, the strongest empire that the world the human civilization has ever seen, it's because of two things. One is that it had something that is quite close to a free market. And second is that it had a strong, at least in the beginning, a strong legal system. And the governments were not able to just simply print money. But in recent decades, particularly in the last few years, and particularly in last year, what they have been doing is that they have broken all their free market system. They have been picking the winners and losers. And the winners are the big corporations who bribe the politicians, and the losers are the workers and the middle class and the small business owners, and of course also medium businesses. Those are the losers, right? And they have been printing money in contrary to what's written in the United States Constitution, right? So all those money printing eventually will break their economy. And of course, I think perhaps, as I have mentioned before, the United States will continue to be a very strong and important economic power and political power, but they need a reckoning with their corrupt system. Their system began as some of the freest and now is, among major economies, one of the most corrupt. So that is a lesson that I think foreign governments who seek to learn from the examples of the United States must pay attention to. Okay, so now let me talk a little bit about this, go over this episode just very briefly in Chinese. So let me think. Okay. 所以说这个我这一集呢，我就是说主要提到的一个问题呢，就是在美国呢，他们有一些经济学家他提出来了，我看今天他有一经济学家提出来了，说这个美国的这些大的公司呢，它不交税。他不交税的话，而且同时呢，美国政府向这个公司贷款借钱，然后的话呢，这个公司呢就是去借美国政府借钱，然后去进行开支，然后这样的话呢，这些政府呢，还这些大公司还有有钱人呢，就是坐收渔利提到拿利润利息拿利息他们就过得很好，这个意思，反而就是贫富差距就变大了。我说的这个说法呢，当然是跟现实是相左的。现实是美国联邦储备银行疯狂印钱，它疯狂印出来钱之后，然后这个钱呢，它是做这量化宽松的过程中呢，它把这个钱呢是给了美国政府，美国政府的话呢，再把这些钱给那个银行，然后呢，然后这些银行呢给零利息或者负利息的贷款给这些大公司，然后在最近的这2年呢，美国联邦储备银行又同时把又同时直接开始印钱，然后直接购买垃圾债券，然后这样呢，使这些大的这些公司就是他们就可以拿到很多白拿的钱嘛，然后这些公司呢，他们也从来不想还，他们很多公司它经营不利也还不了这个钱，他们就把这个钱呢投到股市里，然后使得它现在股市特别红火。这就是美国现在的这个现状所以说呢，我这一集里主要提的问题呢，就是说这个美国现在不光是美国，包括其他的这个国家也是，就是提高公司税率的这个问题的时候呢，我们一定要看好这个公司的税率呢，不光是它的明显的税率，而且还有说有没有其他的这种特例。我个人的感觉呢，就是说公司的这个税的值呢，这个税率呢，它或者呢可以应该是很简单的，所有的公司都交同样的一个税率， 或者呢，应该是有一个这种渐进的税率。渐进的税率就是什么意思？就是说你那个小公司，因为公司比较小，它那个你公司比较小，你可能抗风险的能力比较差，然后你就在初期阶段，在成长阶段，所以呢，你就是可以交一个稍微低一点的公司税率，但是大公司应该交更高的税率，这样子的话呢，才能确保一个经济总是有活力，因为是小的公司由一个从小变大的过程，是经济发展经济发展的一个过程。大公司占着坑不拉屎的这个事呢，这个是这个经济开始衰退的一个过程。所以这是我这个今天主要说的一个问题。同时我还提到的一个问题呢，就是说之所以现在美国现在有的这么一个情况，就是小公司它的交的税率很高，大公司呢相反就交的税率基本上就是0，或者是有的还是不但不交钱，还那个每年还从那个政府拿到好些白拿钱。他这种情况呢，是因为美国政府腐败，他们这个大公司给这个美国官员，主要是这个叫众议院嘛，主要是众议院、参众两院嘛，这个给钱多了，谁给钱多，谁每个那个法律里头就给他们漏洞就写出来了，对吧？这个过程，所以我提到了一个很重要的一点，就是说在其他的国家，包括中国的政府，在看这个学习美国的先进经验的时候，一定要看清楚，不光美国它变成现在这种世界第一强国，不是因为它腐败，不是因为它这个现阶段这个现在有的这些问题，它这个美国变成强国的。相反，是美国变成强国，是因为它当时呢是一个法治比较齐全，然后同时呢又是市场比较自由的情况下，美国变强的。但是现在的情况呢，就是因为它现在的这个腐败导致的现在这个税率呢是小公司交的高，大公司交的低，所以呢它这个就是它这个自由市场呢被它破坏了。美国现在没有自由市场，它没有自由市场，然后同时呢又疯狂印钱，在这种情况下，美国才开始衰退的。所以我们不应该说是看美国现在怎么样，就是说美国现在还是第一，所以我们要学美国的。不是，美国呢应该学美国100年前的情况。美国100年前的情况导致它在50年前变成世界第一了。现在的情况是它要美国现在衰退的这么一个原因，好吧？今天的这个节目就在这里了。Okay, so I think this is this episode. Thank you very much for watching, listening. I encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel. And of course, you can check out my websites. I leave them in the description below. Thank you. Have a great day.